Pretty Girl Club. Today I want to talk about beauty PTSD. Do you have beauty PTSD? Have you found yourself wearing makeup that is 5 shades darker than your skin tone because you want to fit in and maybe you don't want people to comment saying your foundation is too light? Have you found yourself being insecure about changing up your hairstyle because every time you do, you get too much attention and criticism? Have you found yourself chopping off all of your hair because you were looking to fit in and stop facing so much jealousy? Maybe you stopped doing your workout routine because you got tired of people constantly criticizing how you were dieting and exercising. All of these are coping mechanisms that come from beauty PTSD. So I just made up that phrase because I made a video that was talking about being scared of your own beauty. And a lot of the reason why women can be scared of their own beauty is because it can cause jealousy. In a lot of cases, it can also cause sexual assault. Like, let's say if you are young and you're a vulnerable little girl, or if you come from a religious background like me, people automatically sexualize your beauty. And so maybe your parents or the people around you, they're very strict with how you are allowed to dress. And so maybe you were not allowed to embrace your beauty. So you weren't allowed to wear certain colors or skirts or bikinis or makeup. All of these are symptoms of beauty PTSD. So I'm going to talk about where this comes from. I'm going to talk about my experience and then how I overcame it. So I've noticed that one of the biggest things that causes a woman to kind of have trauma around her beauty is the amount of jealousy and hatred she can face because of it. And so I know that I used to have this mindset really bad where it's like my beauty causes trauma. Obviously, nobody wants to walk around and have people plotting on them simply because of their beauty. It can actually be very dangerous, especially if you have a man who is jealous of you or a man who is threatened by your beauty. A lot of times, men will try to use humbling tactics against you. In some cases, men will actually use domestic violence against you, just like how women have done things like throwing acid on women's faces. I know that I've had things like Nair or relaxer put into my shampoo. This is when I was at an HBCU. So, for some women, having beauty has actually caused stress in your life in some cases because you don't know how people will react to you. But on this channel, I try not to focus too much on like the negative side of it because I want all of us in the Pretty Girl Club to work on overcoming this limiting belief about our own beauty. And so instead of having the mindset of my beauty is going to constantly cause me trauma, my beauty is going to cause everyone to be jealous of me, instead of affirming that, I want us to work on overcoming that so that we can heal and also have healthy relationships, whether it's friendships, relationships with family members, or anything else. One of the other symptoms of beauty PTSD is body dysmorphia. So, for example, maybe you have spent a lot of time around gaslighters like I have, and they will tell you you're not even skinny, you're fat. I remember being called fat when I literally was a size 0. So sometimes people will go out of their way to convince you that you are the opposite of what you really are because they don't want you to be able to see your own beauty. So they may say things like, red lipstick doesn't look good on dark skin, or you're fat, or your hair is not that long. They will try to comment on certain aspects of your beauty and they will purposely say that you are the opposite of that so that you can become confused, and it actually can cause extreme body dysmorphia. I've noticed that one of the ways that jealous women will try to project body dysmorphia onto you is they will say things like, oh, you look like a regular, everyday, unambiguous black woman. Let's say you look like Rihanna, okay? You have a beige skin tone and maybe green eyes and black hair. People will say, you look like an everyday, unambiguous black woman. Or they'll say, you don't even look mixed. Or they'll say, you're too dark to be mixed. I thought that you were just black. So sometimes women do this to approximate themselves to you. Sometimes they do it as a humbling tactic because in their mind, they actually pedestalize phenotypes like Rihanna's, or they pedestalize mixed race people. But this actually can be very confusing for you. Let's say you're a teenager or something. If you look like Rihanna and you have been told that you look like Viola Davis, it can actually be very confusing, and it can cause you to choose the wrong makeup shades. It can cause you to kind of have like this cognitive dissonance. And so I've noticed that a lot of people, they will try to project this cognitive dissonance onto you because they don't want you to look different than them. They don't want you to be beautiful and not have their features. I know that this happened to me. I used to think that I was way darker than what I really am. I used to think that I was way more unambiguous than what I really am. I would completely deny my own family members. I mean, that was just irrelevant because other people would project onto me and say, oh, we all look the same, basically, or you look just like everybody else. We're all going to have the same experiences. But that's actually causing a form of body dysmorphia because you've got people around you who are being dishonest about what you truly look like. And so sometimes if you internalize that, it can cause you to go outside looking crazy because you think, oh, you're just blending in, and you're actually not. I remember when I was younger, people would try to convince me that I was darker than what I actually was. So I remember going to the makeup counter and getting the MAC makeup, like, the MAC NC45. I remember getting that makeup and my face was so orange. Like looking back, my face was so orange to the point where even white people would be like, oh, do you have on foundation? And then I'd be like, yeah. And they'd be like, oh, I can tell. Like saying that it was so orange to the point where whenever I went in the natural sunlight, it looked like an Oompa Loompa. I remember this also happened another time. I was wearing that same foundation and I was at the hair salon and she was washing my hair and she was like, wait, are you wearing foundation? And I was like, yeah. And then she didn't say anything, but I can tell she was kind of looking at me like, wow, it's way too orange looking and too tan looking. But the reason that I was doing stuff like that was because I genuinely had a mild form of body dysmorphia to the point where because I had externalized my beauty, has anyone noticed how in the Black community, other people want to be able to control your self-perception? So because I had allowed others to influence my self-perception, whether it was through the media or people around me at my church and stuff like that, it caused me to do things that just made me look crazy or to use hair products that did not go with my hair texture because that was another thing. I have type 3 hair. I would say my hair is maybe like a 3B at best. But I was over here using products that were way too heavy for my hair, that did not work on my hair. They were like way too creamy and thick. And this is because of a form of body dysmorphia. So thinking that I have the exact same skin, the exact same hair as somebody like a Viola Davis. And even though I could see the difference, I was afraid of being called colorist, texturist, or featurist by pointing out the differences in my own phenotype versus someone else. Because you know how like you don't want to be that person that's like, oh, well, I'm light skinned, so I have a different shade than you. Or, oh, well, my hair is a type 3. You know how you don't want to be like that because people are going to get mad and they're going to call you a texturist or featurist or colorist. So I remember having those fears myself. And I feel like this is actually a common thing that happens amongst pretty women where you don't want to call out your differences in your phenotype. Maybe you don't want to emphasize certain parts of your beauty because other people get mad at you. I remember when I was in college, I really was into fashion. I've always loved like going to thrift stores or just getting like these cute outfits. And I would put my outfits together and I would dress up. And I remember girls would make comments like, who are you trying to dress up for? This is not a fashion show. You're doing too much. You're just trying to get attention. Girls who wear dresses and heels all the time, they're just doing that to get attention. You just want people to look at you. And so it caused a form of beauty PTSD because I felt shamed by celebrating my beauty. So for those of you who don't know, women who have inferiority complexes, they carry a lot of toxic shame. And oftentimes this toxic shame comes from maybe their childhood, maybe their own mothers told them, you don't need to be wearing all that, or, you're not going to be as pretty as somebody else because of your dark skin tone, or you can't pull off that makeup look because of your dark skin tone. So sometimes other women carry around this toxic shame and they internalize those voices. And so now their toxic mothers no longer have to put them down because these types of women are their own bullies. So these are the women who actually have thoughts in their head like, I can't pull off red lipstick. So let's say you are dark skinned and you wear red lipstick. She might project that onto you and say, well, dark-skinned women can't wear red lipstick. Dark-skinned girls can't wear blonde hair. You can't wear this. You can't wear that. And she's saying that because she cannot wear that. And the reason she's saying that to herself, though, is because of toxic shame. So she's got this own internalized voice in her head saying, I can't wear this because I'm dark. I can't do this with my hair because my hair's too nappy, or I don't look mixed enough to claim my mixtures. And so, whenever another person carries around a lot of toxic shame, it causes them to kind of go into a shell. And so, I've noticed that a lot of women with inferiority complexes, they're actually living inside of this shell when it comes to their beauty. So sometimes women will try to hide behind beauty items. So that's a method that I've used before, and it actually did come from an inferiority complex. In my case, I actually grew up around white people. So I feel like I can sometimes relate to when darker skinned women talk about their experiences because I was the darkest person in my city, in my class, in my school, because everybody was white. So I remember when I was younger, a part of where my inferiority complex came from at that time was being surrounded by all white people and then comparing myself to those white girls because I didn't realize at the time that there is no comparison. Like, you don't have to compare yourself to others, and especially others who look nothing like you. So I actually remember going to the drugstore, and this is back when Beyonce was doing that L'Oreal ad. This is back when she was repping for like the foundation. So Beyonce is around my skin tone. And so I remember going into the drugstore with my friends who were white, and they didn't even look at the Beyonce photo that was there, because obviously they're white, so they weren't like thinking about it. So I remember they went to get some other brands of foundation, and those brands of foundation, they were good, but it wasn't like as good as the one that like Beyonce had. Like, I remember thinking in my mind, okay, Beyonce's skin tone looks like mine. These other girls, their skin tone does not look like mine. But instead of me being honest with myself at that time and saying, hey, I look nothing like these other girls, why don't I go to the Beyonce section and get one of the foundations from over there? Nope, I didn't do that because I had a deep need to fit in when I was in my adolescence. And I've noticed that some other women, they actually never get over this. They never get over that deep-seated desire to finally fit in. And so for me, when I was like a preteen, I wanted to fit in so bad, I just went to the same makeup counters as the white girls. Like, I just went to the same makeup section and I tried to get a foundation that was not that far off from the girls who were white. So I put the foundation on my face. My face literally looked like sand. It looked like I had rubbed sand all over my face. It kind of looked like a mask a little bit. And so I remember feeling insecure because I was like, oh my God, my face, it looks like I'm wearing a mask and it's kind of like pale looking. But I was too scared to admit to myself that I did not look like the girls around me. I did not look like my friends. But the reason that I was scared to admit that to myself was because nobody told me that it's okay to be different. I didn't have that mindset yet at the time. So I've noticed that a lot of women who have inferiority complexes, they don't want to be different. They don't really want to be the only dark skin in the room with the 4C hair, with the broad features, or, whatever it is that they feel makes them stand out, like being plus size or whatever. For some women, they feel like standing out too much opens them up to be bullied or ostracized. And I know that that's how I felt when I was in junior high. I kind of felt like, okay, if I'm going over to the Beyonce section and these other girls don't really know about Beyonce or they don't really care for Beyonce, then I'm going to look weird. So I remember having a fear of standing out at that time. And it caused me to wear these makeup shades that were too light for me. It caused me to compare my body type. I remember that was another thing as well. So I hit puberty when I was younger. I have an hourglass shape. So I'm a slim hourglass. But my friends that I was around, they were twigs. I mean, they were very, very, very skinny and very tall. So I mean, I'm actually tall as well, but for whatever reason, a lot of the girls at my school, they were taller than me. So think of like real life Taylor Swifts, because I think Taylor Swift is like 5'11". So most of the girls actually looked more like that. They were very, very tall, very, very thin, very blonde and blue-eyed. That was also another common thing. They also had red hair, blue eyes, freckles, whatever. Their hair was naturally straight. So lots of differences between them and myself. But one of the things that helped me to actually overcome the inferiority complex over time was to realize that standing out is actually a good thing. And I've noticed that one thing that people like to say is being exotic is bad, or like being different, because exotic really just means different. It means you look different than the people around you. you look different and you stand out. There's something about your features or hair or skin tone or whatever that kind of stands out amongst your community. So at that time, my community was the white community. And so I didn't understand the concept of standing out and embracing that and like just representing yourself. I wanted these white girls to represent me. I wanted the white community to represent my phenotype. I did not have the confidence yet at that time to put myself on the pedestal and to say to myself, wait a minute, my skin tone is more like how Beyonce's is. I don't care what my friends think of me going over there. Because looking back, they probably would not have cared. I had never even heard them make fun of people that had that skin tone. They were just kind of doing whatever they were used to doing. But the first thing that I had to do to overcome it, though, was to embrace my differences. So I went from wearing the super pale foundation to wearing a super dark orange foundation to finally, by the time I got a bit older, maybe around 19 or 20, to finally embracing my differences. Oh, also, one thing that I forgot to add was, so when I was a teenager, I feel like part of my inferiority complex starting to creep in came from not validating myself. And, part of it is because I was just so young, so I didn't really understand psychology yet. I didn't really understand affirmations that much because when it came to affirmations, like with Christianity and stuff, I would affirm my spirit or affirm that like I'm a child of God or whatever. So I think that that helped, but I did not physically affirm my actual beauty or, think about how beautiful I was. I would say that my pretty privilege, for lack of better words, I didn't really have a concept of that. I didn't really know what that was. In fact, I didn't really understand what privilege was. I didn't know what an inferiority complex was. All I knew was that I was a teenager and I just wanted to fit in with all of the girls at school. So, you know how some people say, oh, the popular girls at my high school that would get asked to the prom, they were the white girls. So then it made me feel like sad or whatever. So for me, it wasn't just that. Like it was literally the fact that everyone, from the nerds to the sellouts to the popular girls to the drug addicts to the people in the grocery store to the people in the bank to the people walking down the street to the people in the mall to the people on the bus, they were all white. So my feeling of standing out, it was bigger than just the school. It was literally the entire city that I happened to live in because I actually grew up in a suburb. So I grew up in a suburb that was actually a very, very wealthy suburb. Like if I were to name it, you guys would know what it is. But I was used to standing out a lot. And at that time, I didn't realize that standing out was a good thing. And so because I didn't understand that standing out was good, I've noticed that I would hear other Black people equate certain things to racism. So, for example, I would get stared at when I walk down the street, or, people would just, how people just naturally look at you. So I remember starting to think, oh, is there something wrong with me? Like because of my Blackness, basically. Like, is there something wrong with me because I'm not white? Like, are people looking at me? So, but looking back now, I don't think there was anything wrong with me. I think I was a cute little girl and they were just looking at me normally. Nobody was like scowling at me and stuff. But if you have an inferiority complex creeping in and you have convinced yourself that whenever someone's looking at you, it's because you're ugly, or it's because you are Black, or it's because you're tall, or it's because your butt is bigger than theirs or something, if you keep on thinking those thoughts and convincing yourself of that, it actually makes that inferiority complex worse. But another thing that I feel contributed to me having an inferiority complex was the fact that I came from a religious background and I actually wasn't allowed to wear makeup. So you know how I just said that we were going to get foundations and stuff? I wasn't allowed to wear that. And I remember like sneaking and wearing makeup, but me not being allowed to wear makeup or experiment with it, it caused me to make a lot more makeup mistakes. So you know how when you're a teenager, you're going to have cringy makeup and it's like you kind of want to get through the awkward phase with learning what looks good on you and what looks bad so that by the time you're an adult, you're like good at makeup and you know what works for you. Yeah, I didn't have that. So I was sneaking and putting on makeup in the bathroom in my high school. And I remember one time my brother's friends saw me and then they told my mom, they were like, oh yeah, we saw Exoticals United. Her face was exploding with makeup. So they just like would tell on me and stuff. So I remember like keeping it this secretive thing. So I had the whole religious side of it as well, kind of feeling shamed or feeling like I was sneaking and sinning basically, or doing something bad, or like trying to get sexual attention by wearing makeup. But again, this all came from the deep-seated need to fit in. Inferiority complexes often come from lack of validation. So that is what I was starting to experience at that time. I just wanted to be validated. I wanted to feel validated. I wanted to feel like girls wanted to sit with me at the lunch table, or like, I have a lot of friends and stuff. Because another thing that actually played into it when I was younger was actually a class issue. So even though I grew up in kind of an upper middle class background, yeah, the people I was around, these people were actual millionaires, and in some cases, some of their family members were actual billionaires. Like some of these families were literally related to some of the biggest tech people that you guys know of, like the most famous people that own all of these major companies. Yeah, some of those people's family members were going to my private school. So there was the class issue that was kind of contributing to it, because I remember going into school and my friends would be wearing like a $400 cardigan, and they would just, throw it on the ground, and like it was not a big deal. Meanwhile, I was shopping at Nordstrom Rack hoping for those same cardigans to go on sale a year or two later so that I can feel like, oh, I'm on the same level. So in my in my case, it was more like wanting to feel on the same level, or wanting to feel like I was living the same lifestyle as someone else. And so this is why it's very easy for me to point out when other content creators on here have inferiority complexes, because this is something that I've studied, number one, and it's also something that I've experienced myself. And oftentimes it really just comes from comparing yourself externally. It comes from having an external locus of control in terms of your own beauty and your own self-worth. And you feel like your self-worth is dependent upon how you compare to other people. So the way that I was able to start overcoming this inferiority complex was actually my senior year of high school. So because it was my senior year, I naturally stopped caring as much about what people thought about me, or kind of like, how do I compare to other people? These other girls, they have all this stuff going for them. I remember girls applying and like interviewing to go to Harvard and all of this other stuff. They had lots of things going for themselves. But once I hit senior year, I finally came to the realization, oh, hey, wait, high school is only 4 years of my life. Like this, my life doesn't revolve around this. Like these are just random people that I'm most likely never going to see again. And so that was actually the first thing that helped to completely break this obsession with like what these other girls think of me, or not even what these other girls think of me, but like, how do I fit in? How can I blend in and stop standing out so much? So yeah, I realized that these people were unimportant. And also, I started to focus on other hobbies and other things besides just my appearance and my looks and stuff like that. Because I also dealt with being sexualized a lot. I'll probably make a separate video about that, actually in high school. So one of the main reasons why I do not pedestalize white men is because I actually grew up around a lot of predator white men. I grew up around a lot of grooming white men. I grew up around a lot of nasty white high school teachers who would like say certain things or do certain things. And looking back, they were definitely trying to groom me. But one of the ways that I got over it was so actually, this was my senior year. I started researching my own background. I started researching what made me different, which was obviously my African American background. So I was looking online just about like the African American culture, and then I discovered that HBCUs existed. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I remember I started watching all these different videos and going on these forums and stuff, and watching documentaries about like HBCUs and kind of like the Tuskegee Airmen and all that. And I was in awe. And I was so like, oh my gosh, like there are so many other people out there. Like this world is so much bigger than my small town and like this high school that I'm going to. And so that actually helped to also break the inferiority complex. It was actually leaning into the thing that caused my phenotype to look different, and then just kind of studying it and researching it. And so I remember I was no longer thinking about school at this point. I was no longer really thinking about my high school. I would be excited to go home and like watch videos and watch documentaries about different HBCUs or like the African American culture. And another thing that happened was so when I was in church and stuff, because I have a Christian background, I'm not religious anymore, but at the time my background was religious. There were these kids from Africa that came to the church I was going to, and they would like sing and do all this stuff. They had the outfits on and everything. And that was another time, that was my first time I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but that was my first time actually encountering African people, like from Africa, and like seeing them in the outfits and all that. And like, me thinking in my mind, I was thinking, wow, in this white city, these people from Africa are here. Like, I've never seen this so up close. And so that was something else that helped me to realize this world is so much bigger than my experience, and my experiences and my environment that I'm in right now, it's small. It doesn't have to define me. And then another thing that I actually realized was I realized my own internalized biases. So for example, I used to be one of those people who would think that others are being racist, or I used to call things racism that were actually not racism. So for example, I remember talking to that woman who said that she was like a bleacher. And she talked about how once she became light skinned, she realized that when she was dark skinned, sometimes she would assume people would be mean to her. And so she would be mean to them first. Or she would engage in these people pleasing activities in hopes to fit in. That was my exact same story when I was at this white high school. So there were times where I would assume, oh, maybe they're not going to like me because I kind of stand out. I don't quite look like them. And so then it would make me kind of shrink back or not try out. I remember there were so many different things in high school that I would have tried out for and been amazing at, but I didn't want to because I feel like, oh, they're not going to like me. Or like we used to do a lot of school plays that were kind of like Renaissance themed and stuff. So I remember thinking, oh, the people from that time, they're white people. So like they're not going to cast me in any of these plays. So why would I even try out for the play? It's just going to reinforce the fact that they don't want a black person to be in the play. So, but looking back, they weren't being racist. That's not racism to have a play that happens to talk about the Renaissance theme, and then I didn't even try out for the play, and then I'm just mad because that play has no black people. The entire school had no black people. So I realized that I was actually calling things racist that were not racist. And I also realized that my personality at that time was a problem. I definitely had a problematic personality because I would do this thing when I was younger to where sometimes I would interrupt people when they're talking, or I would try to like be really loud. And when I say loud, I'm not necessarily saying quote unquote ghetto, but I will say I was being inappropriate. So for example, when we were in choir class, I remember one time the choir teacher recorded all of us singing, like singing this opera song, and he played back the recording in front of the class. And I remember saying out loud in front of the class, oh my God, we suck. This sounds terrible. So I remember I would like say stuff out loud in the middle of the class, like talking shit basically. And looking back, that was actually a way to get attention. That was a way to get people to look at me for shock value because of that inferiority complex. I kind of felt like there's no other way that I can possibly stand out or get attention. So at that time, when I was a teenager, I felt like even negative attention was still a form of attention, or like kind of pointing out the negative things. That was a way to get attention. I know of lots of people who do that on YouTube right now. They make thousands of videos pointing out negative things about blackness or negative things about their own phenotypes and stuff. And oftentimes this actually comes from an inferiority complex, and that person doesn't know how to get positive attention. And so they can only think of getting attention in a negative way by like pointing out every little thing and like nitpicking. So looking back, I used to do a lot of that nitpicking when I was a teenager. And then I would wonder why people didn't really like me as much, or why some of the girls didn't really want to be my friend as much. And it was not because of racism. If I'm pointing out how much everybody sucks, or I'm like telling other people that they suck at singing, or that like the choir is horrible, or like this teacher sucks, like I would say stuff like my teacher sucks, or like this whole class sucks. Basically everything would suck. I would have this constant complaining personality. I'm not trying to call anybody out, but I've noticed that some people, they do have that complaining personality, and then they get mad when people don't want to be around them. Then they get mad when nobody wants to be their friend, because people don't want to hang out with someone who constantly complains. And so looking back, I realized that it was actually not my blackness that caused people to kind of shy away from me at that time, or like when I would make comments like that, it was more so my actual personality. Because you know how some people will call something racism or colorism, but then they have no proof that it's racism or colorism? The only proof they have is so and so didn't want to be my friend, or this person didn't want to date me. And then they don't look at, wait a minute, what did I say anything or do anything that could have potentially made it like really bad? So I remember in high school, I would also do some rude stuff to people, like to the white girls and stuff. Sometimes if a girl would have acne, me and my friends would be like, oh my God, look at your acne. Like just being a mean girl, basically. And so having this mean girl personality or like being mean towards others as a coping mechanism. And by the way, part of the reason that I would do this, being mean to the white girl that had acne, part of the reason I would do stuff like this was because, once again, it was because of that inferiority complex. Those other white girls, they were just minding their business and just fitting in and just they had friends and stuff and they were like, whatever. But for me, I was filled with insecurities at that time. And so I wanted to project those insecurities onto other girls by pointing out if they had acne, pointing out that the choir sucks. And then I would turn around and be thinking, oh, well, they must be racist because, they didn't want to be my friend. And it's like, no, that was my problematic personality at the time. That was my immaturity and my inferiority complex that I was causing to make me not feel relaxed. So sometimes if you feel inferior or if you feel like you stand out. So for me, my inferiority at the time came from feeling like I stood out too much. And like I said, it wasn't just in the school, it was just in my city entirely. And so I would like be mean to other people or whatever and then try to assume that they were racist. But the way that I overcame that though was once I became a senior, I realized once I got more mature, I was like, wait, those kinds of comments are like very rude and also like it doesn't make sense. And for those of you who will try to comment and say, oh, well, were the other white girls making comments saying people sucked or making fun of acne? No, they actually weren't. Nobody was doing that except me. Like nobody was randomly, I didn't grow up in an environment where people were like randomly bullying others because I actually came from a very conservative Christian background. And so it was very looked down upon. If any of you guys have gone to like maybe Christian schools or like Catholic schools and stuff, that it just wasn't the norm. People were much more quiet and kind of to themselves. And so for me, because I am an extrovert, sometimes I would like just say and do random things at inappropriate times. And so for those of you who would say, oh, well, if the white girl would have made fun of somebody's acne, then like she wouldn't have been ostracized or she wouldn't have had any consequences. Okay, well, that didn't happen. None of the white girls made fun of anybody else's acne, or at least not on the scale that I did, because I had never seen any other white girls in the class call out somebody's acne in front of the whole class. So looking back, I would have these bitchy behaviors and then later on try to blame it on, oh, these people must be racist. So once I became more mature, I stopped doing these behaviors and I just started focusing more on myself because I realized these people's opinions don't define me and this environment right here doesn't define me. I realized that the world is so much bigger than the people who surrounded me, and so I actually started focusing more on like my extracurricular activities and stuff and just kind of preparing myself for college. And then I discovered that I have a few talents. So I realized, so I used to do writing like when I was in high school. And then I remember the teacher calling out, like, wow, you really have a lot of potential as a writer. Like, you're a good writer. And I remember I did the little choir thing and they thought I was really good at it. I remember trying out for these little, so they would have like minstrels or like musicals. So not the ones where I accused them of being racist, not the past ones, but the other ones like later on, I just mustered up the courage to try out for these different select choirs and stuff. And I remember I would make it into these little groups or into the choirs. I remember I did like track and stuff and I made it onto the varsity track and it was my first time trying out. So once I stopped externalizing my focus and I began internalizing it and thinking to myself, okay, how can I run as fast as possible so I can like make the track team? How can I memorize these lines or memorize this little song thing so that I can get into the minstrel this Christmas? So I stopped focusing on everybody else basically. And I realized that I have something going for myself. So basically, what I noticed was I didn't realize I was actually putting the other girls on a pedestal. I was putting my focus on them because I didn't have anything interesting going on in my life. I didn't have anything interesting about myself at the time. I didn't really think that I was that interesting. I didn't think I was that special at that time. And so that's why I would hyper focus on what foundation shades do the white girls wear? What is everybody else at school doing? Oh my God, her sweater is $400. I just went and got something from the thrift store. Oh my gosh, they're going to go to Harvard and they're going to go to all these amazing schools. Wow, she just got a new Audi. I don't have a car. So I didn't have anything interesting going on in my life. I didn't have anything to focus on for myself. And so I was externalizing my focus, looking at what everybody else had and how far everybody else was going instead of simply working on myself, whether it was working on my confidence or my extracurriculars. So by the time I got to senior year, I had started working on my own self. So by that time, I was finally allowed to wear makeup once I turned 18, basically. I was allowed to like wear makeup. So I was able to figure out like how to do my eyeliner and all that. So by this time I had switched from the pale sandy shade to my orange foundation. So I went from the too light foundation to the too dark foundation, but that was kind of in style back then. Remember the early 2000s, like the orange Oompa Loompa face? So I remember I was focused more on doing my makeup, trying out for the track team, making sure that I'm studying for like the SATs and the ACTs. And then I started to get that validation that I so heavily craved. And then I realized, oh, wait, I could have just been focusing on myself this whole time instead of like getting mad and saying people suck or like calling out somebody's acne or, just like doing these random things because I felt empty inside. I didn't have a lot of things to look forward to at that time in my life. So that was one of the ways that I overcame the inferiority complex. And then I will never forget. So this was actually the girl who had been wearing the $400 sweater. So I had been watching this girl. She was nice. Looking back, I was jealous of her wealth. So I remember I had been trying out for this little choir thing. I made it into the little select choir. And no, these were not like the black choirs. These were obviously like the white choirs. So I actually, fun fact, so I did an Italian choir, I did a German choir, I did like Italian voice lessons where they had like the opera and all that. Anyway, so I tried out for this little choir thing and I remember I made it. And I also made it to do one of the little plays. So they have those plays where you're singing, but it's not a musical. It's more like a minstrel. So you know how Christmas carolers look, where they dress up in those Renaissance dresses and stuff, and then they kind of like stand around you in a circle and serenade you. Or you know how like at Catholic churches they do stuff like that too. So anyway, I remember trying out for one of these things, and that's a big deal in the white community, or at least in my neighborhood, in the white community where I lived and at the school. And I remember I went and sat on the steps to the stage, kind of like near the cafeteria area. I just sat there to kind of eat my lunch. And I remember that this one girl, Allie, that was her name, like her and like her friends or whatever. Well, they were all my friends, but I always felt like I was on the outside of the friend group. So, but by this time I had kind of overcome it. And I remember they were like, oh, we want to sit by Exoticals United. And I was like, okay, like whatever. And then she was like, yeah, I'm so honored that I get to sit by someone so talented. And I remember they all started like raving about how like I'm so talented. And I actually remember at that time feeling very humbled. So you would think that I would be like, yeah, bitch, like fuck you. That's why I'm the most talented person in the school. You would think that I would feel like, yes, finally I'm getting my validation. But I actually felt very humbled and slightly stupid because I realized, wow, I spent the last like 5 years in junior high / high school doubting myself and like focusing on all these other people, not realizing my own talents, not realizing my own gifts, and not realizing that my talents are actually so good to the point where other people are actually noticing them and talking about them and wanting to learn from me and stuff like that. And so I actually felt very humbled, like, wow, I had so much value. I had so many positive qualities on the inside of myself that I didn't even realize because I was so busy focused on somebody's sweater, for God's sakes, and somebody's foundation shade. I was so focused on a makeup shade and somebody's sweater and someone's blonde hair color or their acne to the point where I didn't realize that I had talents and gifts that I could have been working on this whole time. And all it took was me spending, not even a year working on those things. And look how much progress I had made. So this validation stuff, it was there the whole time. I already had positive qualities in me the whole time. And yes, beauty was one of those qualities as well. But I realized that all that time that I spent trying to get noticed, I could have been spending actually doing real stuff that could have ended up getting me noticed if I want to be noticed so bad. And another thing I realized is that validation is not bad. Wanting validation is not bad, but the women who carry toxic shame, they feel ashamed for wanting validation. So this is why you see a lot of women on YouTube saying, I don't care about validation. Don't nobody give a fuck about validation. Nobody wants your validation. Yes, you do actually want validation. That's actually a core human need. One of the core human needs is connection, validation, feeling like you belong to a group, but also feeling like you still stand out from that group and you still have a sense of individuality and something that makes you special. Those are all normal human needs. Another thing I noticed was that as I became quote unquote popular my senior year, people also started validating my beauty more. So I was never like ugly or anything. I always had pretty privilege, quote unquote. So nobody ever said like, oh, she's ugly. People would say that I was pretty, but because my self esteem was lower, I didn't really believe them. So, but once I started focusing on myself and basically leveling myself up to where people noticed it, then people started validating my beauty. So that's when I first realized that visibility is beauty, beauty is visibility. So you could have whatever face or whatever phenotype, but if you kind of like social climb amongst your peers, then people are automatically going to start validating your beauty because beauty is more of a psychological thing to where if everybody else is validating XYZ girl or XYZ phenotype, others are going to start following and validating that. So I remember this started happening to me more than normal, like more than before. So as my little status or whatever went up in high school, then people were like, making it a big deal. And then I noticed that the same girls that I used to be jealous of or think like, oh, they're so rich or whatever, those girls actually started to become jealous of me. So the tables had actually turned. And I also remember thinking, I've had the same face this whole time, same skin tone, same hairstyle, same makeup, same everything. And now I went from being, I guess, blending in or standing out or whatever to suddenly, oh, I'm so pretty. So that was something else that helped me to realize that status makes people perceive you as beautiful or more beautiful. And it also helped me to realize that people want to hang out with you when you are not a threat to them. And when it came to my friends or whatever, so I became the quote unquote talented one, and they wanted me to help them with certain things, like help them with like reading music or whatever, or all this random stuff, like practicing for plays. So everything was all cool until I started getting too much, I guess, status or whatever, or like being too well known. So then I remember like the girls, some of them actually did admit to being jealous. So for example, one of my best friends at the time, she was white obviously. She admitted that she was jealous because I made it into like being able to do these different plays and these different little choirs and stuff, and that she didn't make it. And so a part of what you would do if you were in these little choirs is you would dress up in these fancy pretty dresses. They would like do your makeup or do your hair. Sometimes you would wear these pretty costumes, and it was like a really big deal. So like at my school, they would travel to Europe, like they went to the Czech Republic before, like they would go to all these amazing places like all over the world. They had been to somewhere in Asia, I think it was like China or something, because I think China, I don't think you can just go to China now. I think you have to like get approved or something to go there. So it was like a very big deal. This was like an elite thing in my community. So after I became, I guess, the queen bee, then that is when things changed. And that is when people started trying to report me. So the same jealous behavior. So they would try to report me, for example, when I would wear a short skirt, even though my skirts were not short, because my mom would never let me wear a short ass skirt to school. And also, my school had a dress code, so what the fuck? Like, no, I wasn't wearing a short skirt. But I remember I'd start getting reported for like wearing short skirts. I remember another time we had a performance for this little choir thing, and then one of the girls, she tried to call out like she's wearing silver jewelry, like I was wearing silver jewelry to match the black gowns that we had on because it just matched really well. And then I remember sometimes the parents or people who were coming to our little concerts and stuff, they'd be like, oh, you're so pretty. Like they would say to me like, oh, you look so pretty. And they would comment on how they liked my styling. So my little silver jewelry and my little shoes with like the gems on them or whatever. You got, early 2000s, whatever. So I noticed that the tables turned and now women wanted to suppress certain aspects of my beauty as well because it was like too much for them to handle. So it had actually reversed. So it went from me being the one making fun of the white girl's acne to now the other white girls making fun of or trying to get me to stop wearing my jewelry and like my little fashion stuff because silver really looks beautiful on my skin tone. I have neutral undertones with a little bit more cool undertones, so silver just looks beautiful. And I remember people literally getting mad and like basically being a hater. I'm like, why is it such a big deal? These are literally bracelets or like little rings or whatever, or little earrings. It's not that big of a deal. But that actually was a form of beauty PTSD because I realized that no matter who you are, no matter what color you are, anybody can be jealous of anybody. Like that broke the whole pedestalization of whiteness for me. It was really my background. It was the fact that obviously I am multiracial to begin with, but also it was being around other girls that were white that started to show the same insecurities that I had previously shown. And another thing I noticed was this other girl, she transferred to the school. She was Asian and white, and she was also very pretty. She could like sing and act, and like she was good at doing all of the stuff that was like very popular at my school. And I noticed that they did the same thing to her. So the girls would like kind of exclude her, or like she would be at the outskirts of the friend group, just like how I realized. And then I looked back and I said, wait a minute, what if all of this stuff, what if some of it was not racism? What if it was just plain old jealousy? Like you don't want her to be in the group, or like you don't really want her to feel that special because she's already going to feel special in other areas, or like you're threatened by her. So that was something that also helped me to break the inferiority complex, was realizing that regardless of your race or your phenotype, you can be threatened by somebody else's beauty and try to cause them to have beauty PTSD, or you yourself could be the person with an inferiority complex and trying to, put down somebody else's beauty. Anyway, I'm going to have to make this into a series because I have so many more things to talk about on this topic. But do you have beauty PTSD? Has anyone ever tried to downplay your beauty, or they've tried to make you feel bad for how you look? Let me know what you think in the comment section, and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.